During lockdown, we've been making use of a vegetable box delivery service to get our fresh fruit and veg, and it's great. It's really convenient. We get a great variety of seasonal veg, but there are a few things that we get more of than we can typically use in a week. And so we get things like garlic building up and onions as well. We get more onions in the box than we typically use in a week. So I'm going to use up a bunch of different leftovers here to make some chutney today. Quick rundown of what we've actually got in front of us here. I've got a pear, 2 onions, 6 apples, a plum, a couple of bananas, actually that's 7 apples, a swede, if you're in the United States that's a rutabaga, a tomato, a bulb of garlic, 3 carrots and half a punnet of grapes. Now they're still edible, but they are just a little bit soft now. So we're going to use all of this as the basis for a chutney. Now this is a British style chutney, which is going to be a pickle that you might serve with cheese and crackers, or put in a sandwich, or serve with a ploughman's lunch, or with a pork pie, or something like that. So it's going to be a kind of pickled chunks of vegetables in a sweet and sour and spicy sauce that's designed for long-term preservation and used to add flavour to other dishes. So the other things we'll need for this is vinegar. So I've got some malt vinegar here. I've got some brown sugar. And in case we need it, I've got some leftover mixed fruit. We bought this for Christmas for making Christmas cakes and Christmas pudding. And we've got this left over. So this is a mixture of raisins, sultanas, various different bits of fruit, including orange peel, candied peel as well. So we'll add some of this if we need it to bulk up the weight of what we're making. This recipe will work with pretty much any ingredients, any sort of fruit and veg that really are suited to this. I'm using a wide variety here. So this would be a good way of using up green tomatoes at the end of the growing season. If you've got a surplus of courgettes or anything like that in the garden that you can't get through, you can pickle them using this kind of a recipe. It's got a kind of a formula, which is going to be 3 kilos of fruit to 1 kilo of sugar and 1 litre of vinegar, plus some spices, obviously. Anyway, let's get started. I'm going to start by preparing the harder things first, the things that need a little bit longer cooking. So that's the carrots, the swede, the onions. We'll get that weighed and cooking, and then we'll put in the medium things, which is basically the apples and the pear, and then the softer things nearer the end so that they don't just cook down to complete mush, which is the bananas and the grapes. The carrots I have here are a bit sad looking, so I am going to peel them. If you had fresher carrots than this, you might just scrub them and leave the skins on. It's really a matter of preference. We're hosting my son's pet rats at the moment, so they'll get the carrot peelings. Now I want this pickle to be able to go in sandwiches, so I've got to think a little bit about chunk size. We're going to cut smallish cubes or smallish dice, so probably nothing bigger than about that, which is about half a centimetre dice perhaps, nothing much bigger than that. And so when we get to the larger end of the carrots, I'm going to cut them again here, just so we don't end up with big chunks. Depending on what you want to do with this, see, if you are making a pickle that you're going to eat on top of crackers, on top of cheese and crackers, you might want to go for larger chunks. So a piccalilli style pickle often has quite large chunks of vegetables in it. But I want to go for something that's going to go in a sandwich without making a sandwich lumpy. So about that size, but it's really up to you. And then all I'm going to do is just weigh this stuff and keep a total of the weight that we're adding up. And then as I subtotal and weigh each ingredient, I'm just going to add it into the big pan I've got here. In this pan I've got the carrots, the swede, the onions and the garlic, and that totals 913 grams. So it's nearly 1/3 of our weight of vegetables. So I'm going to put in about 1/3 of the vinegar we need. So I've put 300 ml of malt vinegar in there, a teaspoonful of salt. So I'm going to bring that to the boil, simmer it with the lid on or we prepare the fruit. As to whether we peel the fruit or not, that's really a judgment call. So for this tomato, I won't peel that. I won't peel the plum. But for the apples, apple skin can tend to go a bit tough when it's cooked, so I'll probably peel the apples. You can see these apples are way past their best for eating raw, but they'll be just fine for this chutney. In fact, they'll probably be a bit sweeter for it. The veg mix with vinegar that we put in initially has been simmering away now for about 20 minutes while we chop the apples. So that will have started to soften. And so now the apples and tomatoes will go in. Kind of running out of space in the pan a little bit now. So this might be a smaller batch than I initially anticipated. We're going to let that cook down. That apple will cook down a bit, and some of it will just turn into mush, but that's good because that's going to be the binding sort of body of the pickle. The plum, the pear is going to be tricky, I think, because it's very ripe. Yeah, the skin is almost falling off of it. But that's fine. That's going to add sweetness and fruitiness to the pickle. And pears have almost no core, so we don't want to waste any of that lovely fruit. That's really all there is of the core in a pear. Bananas, and again, my hands are not huge, these are tiny bananas. Now, bananas might seem like a bit of a strange thing to put in a savoury chutney, but you can put bananas in curry, so why not here? Once it's combined down with all the veg and the other flavours in there, I think it's all going to be a blend of fruitiness and spiciness and sour and sweet. And then finally these grapes, these are seedless grapes, and they are just, as you can see, a little bit squishy, but they're not mouldy or anything like that, so they'll be peak sweetness. Grapes are probably, or fresh grapes at least, are probably a bit of an unusual thing to put in a chutney like this, but usually it would be raisins, so same thing but just dried. Just going to take them all off the stalks and then give them a wash, and then I think we'll just at least chop them in half to let the juices out, and also critically to let the vinegar inside them, because we do want these to pickle, not to ferment. This is not a fermented pickle, this is going to be a vinegar pickle, so we don't really want anything alive in it once it's all cooked down and put in the jars. There are of course some very lovely fermented pickles out there, but this is not that kind of a recipe. That's about as much fruit as I can fit in this pan, and we're going to stop there. So that's about 2 kilos of fruit and veg, so I'm going to make 2/3 of the recipe, so it's a 3 to 1 to 1 ratio, so I'm going to go 2 to 2/3 to 2/3. So we're going to go for another 360 ml of vinegar, which is bring this perilously close to the top of the pan, but no matter. And then we've got to somehow fit some spices and 650 grams or 660 grams of sugar in there. So there's 400 grams of brown sugar, which is all I've got in the cupboard. So I'm going to use some white sugar as well, but I need to be, let's get it dissolved in first. So I need another 250 grams of sugar after that. These are the spices I'll be adding. I've got about a teaspoonful of ground mixed spice. You might know that as pudding spice. It is a blend of cinnamon, coriander seeds, dill seeds, ginger, cloves and nutmeg. This ground mixed spice tends to be a bit variable in terms of what's in there. Sometimes it has allspice in there, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it has ginger in, sometimes it doesn't. But it's pudding spice essentially. I've got a teaspoonful of ground allspice. I've got a heaped teaspoonful of chili flakes and a heaped teaspoonful of curry powder. So it might look like this curry powder's been in the back of my cupboard since the 1960s, but actually this is a brand new pack. It's just the pack design hasn't changed since maybe the 70s or 60s. I would totally wear a shirt with that pattern. Okay, I've transferred that to a larger pan because actually that's where I should have started. It was boiling it to reduce it, was nearly boiling over the edges of the pan, so I've just put it in a bigger pot so I can boil it a bit harder and reduce off some of that liquid. This is the point where we will add in the spices. So I've got my curry powder, chili flakes, allspice, mixed spice. Not the same thing as allspice. Allspice is one botanical plant. Mixed spice is a blend of different things. It's important that the spices go in at some point before the end of cooking, obviously, because those spices need cooking in their own right, and they need to cook into the vegetables and fruits that we've got in here. I'm supposed to add about another 200 grams of sugar to this pickle, but I don't have any more brown sugar. So I think what I'm actually going to do is add 200 grams here of mixed fruit. This is mixed dried fruit. It's got orange peel, currants, sultanas, raisins in it. And I'm going to chop these up a little bit to release the sugar from inside the fruits. And this will give us not only the additional sweetness, but this will thicken up the pickle as well. This will give it a bit more gooey spreadableness, if that's a word. Did I invent a word there? Spreadableness? Spreadability. Spreadiness. So yeah, just chopping these up because I want them to kind of half dissolve. Right, let's get that in the pot. And you can see that this is now starting to reduce down very nicely. It's still a little bit too liquid for what we want, but we're going to let those raisins absorb some of that. And when that's cooked a little bit more, we'll have a taste. And we will try and gauge the sweetness, saltiness, spice level and adjust as necessary. Right, so that's been simmering for about 45 minutes now, and everything's starting to cook together. We've still got recognisable chunks of vegetables and fruit in there, but it's starting to sort of bind together, which means it's nearly there. It's all completely cooked, so I'm just going to now take a tiny little bit and have a taste for seasoning and balance. Okay, it's sweet enough, it's sour enough, it's actually quite spicy from those chili flakes and that curry powder. That curry powder is actually quite a potent one, but it could do with some more aromatics in there. So this is where I'm going to add another teaspoonful of ground mixed spice, and really what's left in my allspice jar, which is about half a teaspoonful, so that can go in as well. I have to remember to put allspice on the shopping list. And we'll just stir that in, and we'll give that another 20 minutes cooking or so, just to soften those spices and cook them into things, and just to finally bring it to the texture where it's ready to go in the jars. Okay, and we're now at the point where that's been cooking for, I suppose, about an hour, and you can see everything's really starting to break down and stick together, which is good, and there's very little free liquid left. So we are at the point now where this needs to go in jars. These jars are just clean, they're not sterile. I haven't sterilised them in the oven or anything, I've just washed them and rinsed them and dried them. Because it's not the sterilisation that's keeping this pickle preserved, it's the vinegar and the sugar and the salt. So, well, this jam funnel is meant to make things easier to fill, but it's actually turning out to be a bit of an impediment because the pickle's a bit lumpy. And I'm just going to make sure there are no voids inside the jar, because we don't really want air gaps in there. We want this to be completely immersed in its own juices. So a tiny bit more in that jar, I think. We'll put the lid on while they're hot, because that will then pop down and it'll create a partial vacuum in the top, which is just useful in keeping the lid sealed. It's always a bit of an art form filling up second-hand jars like this. These are all jam jars and honey jars and various different things like that. And it's always worth having an assortment of different sizes so that when you get near the end of the batch, you can fill up a small jar or the right size thing. Now, you might be disappointed to learn that you're not going to see me use this pickle in this video, because chutneys generally need a little bit of time to mature. So I'm going to leave this for 3 or 4 weeks. So we are now start of February, so start of March. At the beginning of March I will publish a video where I taste some of this chutney with some cheese, so stay tuned for that. But it would be a shame to taste it now, because it still needs some time for all these flavours to kind of work into each other, so we wouldn't really be getting a very representative taste of it if we were to try to use it now. Okay, so I've got quite a lot left. I am going to fill up this whopping great jar here, and we'll see if we can save that for next Christmas. So a properly made pickle like this will keep almost indefinitely, and it will just keep on getting better, really, within reason. I mean, if you came back in 100 years, it might not be great, but I once misplaced a jar of pickle and put it away with a box of empty jars, and it was there for 10 years. It was a 10-year matured elderberry and apple chutney, and it was just amazing. The way it had matured, the way the flavours had developed, and it just had such a depth of flavour. And hardly any left. I am just going to have one last little taste so I can remind myself what we're waiting for here. Oh, it's good. It's good already, but it does need to mature. The vinegar flavour is a little bit harsh at the moment, but over the next month that will soften and mellow, and we will end up with a really nice, spicy, fruity pickle here. So there we go, that's my leftover fruit and veg chutney. If you're thinking about replicating this, there will be recipe notes in the video description. But if you're looking for an exact recipe, don't worry too much, because recipes like this are really very forgiving. As long as you get the general proportions right, and as long as you cook it long enough that it reduces down and pickles, it's going to be fine. And of course you can add more spices or dial them back a bit if you like it more spicy or less. So I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.